Y'all ready? Like to reconvene the SST committee. Thank you for indulging us while we had to cast 9 votes, Mr. Administrator. So thank you. It's good to see you on the floor, too. I hope that brought back good old memories. Okay, well, we're going to resume our 5 minutes of questioning by our members. And let's see, Mr. Tonko, gentleman from New York, you're first for 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
I thank the chair and the ranking member for this important hearing today, and thank you to Administrator Nelson for the work you do to ensure the success of the world's preeminent civil space agency and your awesome leadership that you provide. Up in my district, New York's capital region, I'm deeply proud of the critical research and tech development being done at world-class academic institutions such as Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I'm particularly thinking about the R&D there that relies on funding from the Biological and Physical Science Division within NASA's Science Mission Directorate. The BPS division funding provides novel opportunities to better understand the impact of the space environment on both life and physical sciences. Discoveries made on the International Space Station with BPS funding have advanced our understanding of quantum mechanics and helped facilitate the advancement of semiconductor-based electronics. The BPS has also enabled advances in immunotherapy, regenerative medicine, osteoporosis treatments, and neurodegenerative diseases. Despite how important this research is, the BPS budget within the Science Mission Directorate remains severely underfunded and was acknowledged as such in the recent decadal survey. In fiscal year 23, and BPS budget was 84% less than it was in 2004. And as a result, the number of investigators in the state of New York has decreased by some 67%, causing significant reductions in education and training and negatively impacting the local economy. Specifically, at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the BPS division currently funds approximately 4 PIs and over 25 graduate and undergraduate students. However, just a few years ago, that number was closer to 7 PIs. Without significant reinvestment, labs funded by BPS will no longer be sustainable as the number of grants awarded is reduced and be forced to change research directions, threatening the success of NASA's exploration goals. So, Administrator Nelson, how is NASA attempting to be responsive to the ambitions of reinvestment from the biological and physical sciences community decadal survey in this constrained budget environment?
Congressman, when John Glenn first flew, we weren't sure what was going to happen to the physical body. There was even concern that would the eyeballs stay in the sockets. We had flown a chimpanzee prior, but you just think when you don't know what's going to be the physical, biological reaction and how far we now have advanced where we are realistically getting ready to go back to the moon in order to prepare to go to Mars. And so the function of the amount of grants that would go to a university such as the very eminent one that you just mentioned in your district is a function of the amount of the budget that you give us. Just in sciences in this fiscal year 24, because of the constraints that are upon you in 24 and 25 as a result of the compromise reached to be able to avoid the default of the full faith and credit of the United States government. For example, just in science, it's $1 billion cut in 24, a similar cut in 25. Once you get to 26 and don't have the constriction that you have on the budget, I wish that you would, because the area that you have specified are areas that we have to know what's going to happen in order to send humans all the way to Mars. The moon is 4 days away. Mars is 7 to 8 months away, unless we develop the new technologies such as propulsion of nuclear thermal, nuclear electric propulsion that could get us there faster. If we go conventionally 6, 7, 8 months, then we're going to have to stay on the surface a very long time until the planets realign to get back in 7 or 8 months. So these are all a part of the challenges, but they're also exciting problems to solve. And we will keep those grants going to universities because that is a main source of the research that we do at NASA.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, I have another question that I was going to ask about. I'm out of time, so I will forward that to the committee. But it's my hope that through this budget process, Congress will recognize the crucial importance of this research to help BPS and NASA fully realize its mission. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. It's good to see you again, Administrator. It's good to see you in Northeast Ohio just a couple of weeks ago for the eclipse, and I really appreciate you coming out to Cleveland and spending the afternoon with us. It really means a lot, and to have you there is very special. While you were out there, we had some great conversations, including about the importance of NASA Glenn Research Center, which is located right in my district, and to NASA's mission. Administrator Nelson, NASA's Space Technology Mission Directorate funds a lot of significant priorities for NASA, many of which the Glenn Research Center is involved in. However, funding for STMD has been relatively stagnant over the last 5 years. The fiscal year 25 budget request proposes ramping up funding for STMD in large part to support the development of fission surface power technology to create a nuclear power system that could operate on the moon. Administrator Nelson, can you please talk about the importance of fission surface power and why we need to invest in it now and not just further down the line? And could you please address the importance of Glenn's role within the project?
Yes, Congressman, and it was great seeing you in Cleveland. And before I forget, for Congressman Tonko, our commander going to the moon, Reed Weissman, on Artemis II, he is a graduate of Rensselaer Polytechnic. Congressman, we got to have more power on the moon. We go to Mars, we got to have more power, particularly as you get further away from the sun and you can't rely on all solar power. And so fission surface power is going to be a necessary element. And we're going to start this with the moon. So this is part of the reason we go back to the moon in order to go to Mars. The 25 requests is 113 million. Now, do you want me to get into nuclear electric and nuclear thermal as well, or do you want to keep it to fission surface power?
I'd like to keep it to fission, just because mainly that's what's up there that we're working on.
Okay. Well, I certainly respectfully request that you all grant our 25 request of 113 million.
Yeah. Okay. We'll take a look at it. I understand. And I get it. As you had already acknowledged that it's been a tough year working with the budget, and the last thing that we want to do is to cut down anyone. But we have to make sure that we're being responsibly and efficient for the country. But yes, Administrator, I'm with you 1,000%. And thank you for your earlier answer. Additionally, as you know, NASA Glenn Research Center leads the Communication Services Project, which leverages commercial capabilities to provide next-generation data relay for NASA satellites and to ensure that there's no data gap as NASA's older communication satellites continue to age. Can you speak to the importance of the work performed at Glenn? And do we have your commitment, possibly, that you will provide the resources to the center that needs to complete this project quickly?
You can't fly in deep space unless you can communicate. Our deep space communication system ran into a problem because we need to communicate with all of those science instruments, including the James Webb Space Telescope, bringing back all of that data from deep in space, and lo and behold, we had to have the capability of communicating to Artemis 1 in the test flight of the rocket. And we didn't have all of the bandwidth that we wanted. So we need to improve that. And this is especially essential as we are going further and further out into space. Right now, in low Earth orbit, we got enough communications. We can handle that. We need to update it, modernize it, et cetera.
Yeah.
But deep space is a different thing.
Well, if there's anything that we can do to work with you, and especially at NASA Glenn, getting them the resources or just getting the education or familiarizing us with how we can make it more efficient or to get to the next step, I would really appreciate it. And what makes me just really glad to hear is, your acknowledgement of how important NASA Glenn is, not only to our region, but to the country and more so the world, and the capabilities that we have there. And I just, once again, want to thank you for your time. It's been truly a pleasure to work with all of you and your staff. And so just thank you again, and anything we can do in the future to work together to make sure we can continue to evolve and progress in the right way. You have a friend in me. So thank you, Administrator. I yield back.
Congressman, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, another example of the deep space communications that we just reestablished with Voyager 1, which is outside of our solar system, approaching interstellar space. And it came back to life. And lo and behold, we got it. And where it's located, so far away at the speed of light, the transmission takes 22 hours. And we just reestablished that.
What, if you don't mind my asking, Mr. Administrator, what caused that to come back into force?
Again, these wizards, they do all kinds of things.
Okay.
And this is a spacecraft. It's a very old spacecraft.
Right.
Voyager 1, I think it was launched back in the 70s. And so it is still perking.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. That's great information to know. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Administrator Nelson. With the goals of returning Americans to the moon and aiming for Mars, the Artemis program has private partners in all 50 states and over 24 in Florida's 10th Congressional District, which is my district. Artemis is a significant contributor to NASA's $4.7 billion economic impact on Central Florida alone, and has partnered with the University of Central Florida Go Knights on several research projects to support lunar landing and living. This is why my colleague, Congressman Posey, and I are leading a bipartisan letter to the CJS Appropriations Subcommittee calling for additional Artemis funding to overcome delays and technical complications. Mr. Administrator, with all the challenges of such a complex and cutting-edge program, what can NASA do to minimize further delays in the Artemis mission cadence?
Well, first of all, we can have congressmen like you that help us make an additional request. Understand that we're not going to launch until it's ready. And that is because safety is our first. When we put humans on an explosive bomb called a rocket, we're going to do everything possible to make sure it's as safe as possible, realizing that everything is cutting the edge of the envelope that we do. But especially when humans are in the loop, we're going to make it that much more safe. So we're on schedule next year to have 4 astronauts circle the moon and check out the Artemis spacecraft. We are under contract with SpaceX for September of 26 to have a lander of which we would go into lunar orbit and they would transfer in and go down to the surface for 6 days. Obviously, if that lander's not ready, we're not going to fly at that time. But that is the schedule, and that's what the contract calls for.
Thank you. And the most recent success in the partnership of NASA and private space industry was a soft landing on the moon's south pole. as part of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. How does the work of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program complement the work of the Artemis program?
They are scouts for us, just like sending scouts out into the wilderness. So, for example, one of them that is going on Intuitive Machines at the end of the year is going to start digging in the South Pole to see if there is water underneath the surface. If there's water and it's in enough abundance, then we have rocket fuel.
And overall, what can we as members of Congress do to support the nationwide economic and scientific impact of NASA's work, especially when it comes to the Artemis program? I mean, we know that I think any day now China will be sending, will do the first mission to bring back things from the far side of the moon. We know this is funding these programs is the best in the best interest of our national security and the work that we do. But what can we as members of Congress do?
There's the old saying, the president proposes and the Congress disposes. You're in it. You're our partner. You make it possible for authorizing us to do this stuff and then appropriating the means by which to do it.
And lastly, can you briefly describe some of the scientific highlights of the commercial missions in terms of the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program?
Oh, yes, sir. For example, this last one, it was an Intuitive machine. It caught its leg on a rock as it was coming down, and it tipped over. The fact that it tipped over, it didn't have its antenna pointing in the right direction to receive. But it was still faint enough that we could get enough to know that it was alive. There were 6 NASA experiments on board. Now, this is an incredible story of the chairman of the full committee, Hal Rogers, in his district is a university, Morgan State. They have big dishes that can support the commercial program. But in this case, the clips wasn't able to communicate. They didn't have enough power from their commercial communications. But Morgan State was uniquely positioned that it could also communicate with our government deep space communications that had the power in order to receive that weak signal. And therefore, most of the objectives of the mission were successful with a connection there made through Morgan State. That is an example of a daring do that suddenly the NASA scientists and the commercial community and a university were able to figure out real time.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Administrator, and yield back.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I'd like to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, great to see you again. And sure, being on Capitol Hill and testifying in these committees is among your favorite things to do. So we have a hometown hero that is in orbit right now on the International Space Station. Dr. Jeanette Epps is beloved by her hometown of Syracuse and really has inspired whole generation of young kids in school, and she is the talk of the town and the toast of the town. She's only been up there now for almost 2 months. Can you give us some insight in the importance of her work and her mission while she's up in space?
Jeanette is an example of the extraordinary ability of our astronauts, their capability. In her case, she had to wait a long time to fly. And yet, she is there on orbit for 6 months, performing great science and maintenance of the International Space Station. Sometimes our astronauts have a great disappointment. The best example that I can think of is Deke Slayton. He was one of the original 7. John Glenn, Alan Shepard, etc. Deke was one of them, and they discovered a heart murmur. And Deke was not qualified to fly. And yet Deke then took the role as the chief of the astronaut office through all of those years of Gemini and Apollo.
For Dr. Epps, if I may, can you talk about how her mission is helping us get back to the moon specifically?
Well, everything that we do on low Earth orbit is in preparation for us to have the understanding and the preparation so that we can go further. And that's what we're starting to do, to go back to the moon, not just for the sake of going to the moon, because we did that a half century ago, but we're going back to the moon to learn in order to go to Mars, just like we are doing things in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station to go further. In addition, we're doing serious science on board the International Space Station. Earlier in the committee hearing, I had testified about things going on cancer research with the drug Keytruda and with stem cell research. All of that's going on. And although I don't know Jeanette's specific science project that she's working on today, she will be working on a lot of that science.
Well, we look forward to having her back, but not too soon. She's got a lot of work to do while she's there. I'd like to spend the last little bit of our time talking about the Draco project and the cooperation between NASA and DARPA with nuclear energy and propulsion. Are we still on track for a 2026 test launch? How is the Draco project progressing?
Draco is primarily a DARPA project. We are working with them on nuclear thermal. It's a joint NASA-DARPA project. Yes, it's my understanding that it is on schedule. It is testing out nuclear thermal propulsion. That's not the only nuclear propulsion. There's also nuclear electric propulsion, and I hope to get this cranked up and going. Why? Because we need to go faster to Mars. Chemical propulsion will get us there in 7 or 8 months. Nuclear thermal, nuclear electric can get us there faster. The reason that's important, if we can go fast, we don't have to stay on the surface on the first time, second time, a year or two until the planets realign. We'd have a chance of getting back so that we go for a short visit, test out what we needed to with all the systems, the equipment, the spacecraft, the landers, etc., and get back. And I think nuclear thermal and nuclear electric is the propulsion of the future.
Great. Well, if we get nuclear propulsion, sign me up. I'd be happy to go. Thanks very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And I want to say also, Congressman, that the end of the story about Deke Slayton is he ended up flying. He did an experimental medical procedure, and it worked on the heart murmur. And he was able to fly years later. And that was a good thing. But just think of all the time he had to wait.
It's a very good thing, sure was. Okay, the gentleman from California, Mr. Mullen, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Administrator Nelson, for your testimony today. As you know, the International Space Station is authorized to operate through at least 2030, after which time NASA plans to use commercially developed space stations to support its low Earth orbit research and development. We're nearly halfway through 2024, leaving just 5.5 years to ensure that commercial stations are ready and certified for NASA's use. I'm particularly concerned about the risk of losing access to low Earth orbit for research. There are so many important discoveries and innovations that have been developed thanks to NASA providing this platform to do it in space. So could you just share with the committee what the risk might be of a gap in sustaining how low Earth orbit R&D activities should commercial space stations not be ready, and then how might a gap affect our preparedness for Artemis and the development of low Earth orbit ecosystem in general?
Congressman, we don't intend there to be a gap for the reasons that you just articulated. It is so important that we keep this continued presence of being able to not only research on fantastic things like pharmaceutical discoveries that benefit us here on the face of the earth, but also in preparation for going further to the moon and to Mars. For example, we would be training our astronauts in zero-G in low Earth orbit on a space station before we would send them to the moon or to Mars. And so those are just a couple of examples of why it's important. And we do not intend for there to be a gap. And thus, it's all the more reason that as you all give us direction in the authorization bills, and as you partner with your appropriations committees in giving us the financial means in which to do this, that we continue to have the development of this commercial space stations that will take the place of when we want to deorbit the space station, because it's getting old, and we want to deorbit it in 2031.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your optimism. And thank you for your testimony, sir. With that, I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, I had the pleasure of meeting with Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy, and was really taken by her passion for expanding opportunities in space exploration and STEM. When I chose to serve as a member of the Space Science and Technology Committee, I envisioned opportunities to work with my colleagues to expand the realm of STEM education and workforce beyond those who have traditionally had access to them. I hope the work we do and the funding we are advocating for here today will make dreams of so many students from underserved areas. I think of Trayvon Martin, before he passed, who wanted to be an astronaut. I think and hope that the funding that we advocate for here will make some of those dreams become a reality around our nation. While NASA has no physical infrastructure in my district, Pennsylvania's 12th, the businesses in my district are crucial to the work that the administration does. For fiscal year 23, my district won over $58 million in contracts across 19 businesses and universities, including small and women-owned businesses. Proposed budget cuts to NASA at 22% or more below the fiscal year 23 enacted level is an attack on the brilliant minds and our innovative, industrious business owners who fuel American leadership in space exploration and technological development. NASA has extensive partnerships in Western Pennsylvania, partnerships that it relies on to carry out its various missions and mandates. This current Congress continued to find new, innovative ways to shortchange or take away from the American people, especially the amazing scientists, students, and workers in my district who are helping to fuel NASA to discoveries and technological developments that will vastly improve the human conditions here on Earth. I will continue to ensure my region thrives around this space economy. Administrator Nelson, I congratulate NASA for the 2 commercial lunar payload services missions that have flown this year. These missions have fostered national pride in our nation's space program and produced considerable momentum for the future. I know there are more missions on the way this year and next, including some missions that promise truly groundbreaking science and exploration opportunities. Some of these missions will also demonstrate important infrastructure for improved renewable energy generation, such as space-based solar power. Can you just please discuss some of these missions as well as outline your commitment to the lunar discovery and exploration programs in Eclipse.
Right from western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, is a company that's Astrobotic.
I know the one.
They are going to have a mission later this year with a huge instrument on it called Viper. And it is scheduled upon landing to drill down in the South Pole underneath, maybe go down that far, and to see if there is water in abundance. We know that there is ice because we've seen that in the crevices of rocks that are in constant shadow. So if there is water, then there's rocket fuel, hydrogen and oxygen. The Eclipse missions that are going, as I described earlier, are like scouts. They go out and they scout the wilderness before the humans get there. And that's exactly what we're doing. We will have the South Pole of the Moon characterized by a lot of these commercial landing missions, usually with NASA instruments. We will have it characterized much more in depth. At the outset of your remarks, you mentioned something about your admiration of Pam Melroy. I want you to know that is very mutual admiration. Pam Melroy is the real deal. She's the third woman in the Air Force to be a test pilot, and she is the second woman in NASA to be a space shuttle commander. And so your recognition of talent is certainly right on the mark.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And while I do have two other questions, I'm happy to have let you go with that one. And I'm happy to yield back. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Administrator, thank you. Thank you for your valuable testimony and for the members for their question. The record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.